The chains bit into Grama Ironblood's wrists the moment the blacksmith's boy hammered the last rivet shut, and the crowd in Fallowmere Crossings Market Square roared like they had already won. "Fight fair, Tusk face," someone shouted from the crowd, and laughter rippled through the press of bodies gathered around the trampled dirt circle. Grama did not so much as turn her head toward the voice. She stood with her shoulders back and her chin level, 7 feet of corded muscle wrapped in fitted warrior's leathers the color of old rust, the laces at her sides pulled tight over a figure built for war and somehow cruelly made beautiful by it. Her tusks caught the pale autumn light. Her dark eyes swept the crowd once, slow and contemptuous, before settling on the iron cuffs binding her wrists together in front of her. "This is not a fair trial," she said, and her voice carried across the square like a dropped anvil. "Cold iron saps an orc's strength. Your magistrate knows this." Magistrate Corwin Hale, a thin man perched on a raised platform with a ledger open on his knee, did not look up from his papers. "The treaty permits trial by combat to settle disputed claims of theft. It says nothing of restraints. Captain Vance's men have simply taken precautions." Captain Aldrich Vance stood at the magistrate's shoulder in his garrison colors, arms crossed, a smile tucked into the corner of his mouth like a blade sheathed but not forgotten. "We would not want the accused to have an unfair advantage over Master Ash," he said smoothly. "3 horses went missing from the Dunmore stock 2 nights past. An orc was seen near the paddock. Ironblood here claims innocence. Let her prove it with steel, as the treaty allows." Cyrus Talbot stood near the front of the crowd, a leather smith's apron still tied over his plain wool shirt, hammer calluses on his hands and soot still gray in the creases of his knuckles. He had come to the square only to fetch nails from the trading post before the market closed for the day, and instead he found himself rooted to the spot, watching an orc woman be shackled for a crime that had happened while, as far as he knew, she had been 3 days' ride away at the Ironblood camp. He knew this because he had seen the manifest at Master Reeves' forge only that morning. The Ironblood trading party had arrived at dawn, road-worn and half-frozen, having ridden through the night to make the market bell. She could not have stolen those horses. He almost said so aloud. He did not, because a soot-stained smith's boy speaking up against a garrison captain in front of half the town was the sort of thing that got a man's teeth kicked in before sundown. And Cyrus Talbot, though once in a life he no longer spoke of, he had been Sir Cyrus of Aldermere, Knight of the Crown, had learned the hard way what it cost to open his mouth on behalf of people the world had already decided to hate. The champion, Grendel Ash, stepped into the ring. He was a mountain of a man, hired muscle out of the garrison's own coin, bare-chested despite the cold, swinging a war hammer that looked heavy enough to fell a bull. He grinned at Grama the way a man grins at a chained dog he has been paid to beat. "Try not to bleed on my boots," he said. Grama's lip curled back over one long tusk. "Try not to weep when I break your arm." The magistrate rapped his gavel. The crowd surged forward against the rope line, and Cyrus Talbot, watching a woman fight for her life with her wrists bound and her strength stolen by cursed iron, felt something in his chest crack open that he had spent 3 years trying to keep shut. Grendel came in swinging, and Grama, even shackled, even weakened, moved like water poured downhill, sidestepping the first blow with the chain rattling between her wrists. The second blow caught her across the shoulder and she staggered, and the crowd howled with delight, and Cyrus's hand closed white-knuckled around the coil of horseshoe nails in his apron pocket. She went down to one knee. Grendel raised the hammer high for the blow that would end it, and the crowd's roar became a single hungry sound. And Cyrus Talbot, disgraced knight, forge hand, a man who had told himself for 3 years that he would never again put his body between cruelty and its target, moved before he decided to. He ducked under the rope line, snatched Master Reeves' spare tongs from the cart at the ring's edge, and hurled them across the dirt. They struck the ground at Grama's knee with a ringing clatter, close enough for her bound hands to reach, and every eye in the square swung toward him instead of her for one precious heartbeat. It was enough. Grama's fingers closed around the iron tongs, and she drove them up and into the gap of the manacle chain with a strength that should not have been possible from a kneeling, shackled woman. The chain link shrieked and split. She surged upright, both wrists still cuffed but no longer bound to each other, and caught Grendel's descending hammer haft in one bare hand. The crowd's roar died into a single, indrawn breath. "You should have used better iron," Grama said, and wrenched the hammer sideways with such force that Grendel Ash left his own feet and hit the dirt on his back with a sound like a felled tree. She stood over him, chest heaving, blood from the shoulder wound darkening her leathers, and looked out at the crowd that had come to watch her die. "I did not steal your horses," she said, "but I will happily take payment in coin for the insult of these chains." No one moved. Grendel did not get up. Magistrate Hale's mouth opened and closed twice before any sound came out of it, and Captain Vance's smile had gone thin and brittle at the edges. "The claim is withdrawn," the magistrate said at last, his voice cracking on the last word. "The horses were found this morning, tangled in bramble along the river road. They simply wandered." Grama turned, slow and deliberate, and found Cyrus Talbot still standing at the rope line where he had thrown the tongs. Their eyes met across the trampled dirt, and something passed between them that had no name yet, something that made the noise of the crowd fall away like water off stone. She walked to him, ignoring the guards who did not dare stop her, ignoring Vance's furious hiss for order, and stopped close enough that Cyrus had to tip his head back to hold her gaze. "You threw me my freedom, human," she said. "Tell me your name." "Cyrus," he said. "Cyrus Talbot." "Talbot." She said it slowly, testing the shape of it the way one might test the balance of a new blade. "I am Grama Ironblood. I do not forget debts, Cyrus Talbot. I intend to repay this one." Then she turned and walked from the square with the chain still hanging broken from one wrist, and Captain Vance watched her go with a look on his face that promised this was not the end of it, not by a long road. The market bell rang for the closing of the day's trade, and Cyrus stood alone at the rope line with his heart going like a smith's hammer against an anvil, wondering what exactly he had just done, and knowing with a strange, quiet certainty that he would do it again. The wound on Grama's shoulder was not deep, but it bled freely, and by the time the crowd had scattered to gossip in the taverns and trading posts of Fallowmere Crossing, Cyrus found himself trailing after her toward the horse lines at the edge of the square with a roll of clean linen he had begged off Master Reeves' wife. "You do not need to follow me, smith's boy," Grama said without turning around. "I'm not a smith's boy. I'm the smith's hand. There's a difference, though I'll grant you it's a small one." He caught up to her at the picket line where her horse, a heavy-boned mountain-bred gelding, stood tethered beside two others belonging to her trading party. "That cut needs binding before it stiffens." She rounded on him, and up close she was even more striking than she had seemed across the ring skin, the deep green-gray of river stone, a long scar tracing one cheekbone that did nothing to diminish her, dark eyes flecked with amber, and an expression that suggested she was deciding whether to be amused or offended by his presence. "You think a market cut will trouble me. I think you'll trouble yourself less if it's clean." He held up the linen. "I've stitched worse on men twice your size and half your composure. Let me look at it or don't. I'm not going to beg." Something shifted in her face, not quite a smile but close kin to one. She sat on an overturned trading crate and pulled the torn leather of her shoulder guard aside, and Cyrus knelt beside her and set to work with the careful, economical hands of a man who had once bound wounds on a battlefield and had never quite unlearned the skill. "You handled that hammer like you've held one before," she said as he worked. "Not a forge hammer, a war hammer. Long time ago." He did not look up from the binding. "Different life. You threw tongs into a trial circle to save an orc you had never met. That is not the act of a man who has forgotten how to fight. It is the act of a man who has chosen, very deliberately, not to." He tied off the linen and sat back on his heels, and for a moment neither of them said anything, the noise of the market fading into the ordinary business of dusk wagon wheels, the low murmur of trade, a dog barking somewhere near the tanner's stalls. "Why did you do it?" Grama asked finally. "Because it was wrong," Cyrus said. "Because you didn't do it. Because I've watched too many people stand by while something wrong happened in front of them, and I told myself once that I'd never be one of them again." That sounds like the kind of promise that gets a man killed on the border. Maybe. He shrugged, and there was something tired and old in the gesture that did not match his years. "I've made peace with worse odds." She studied him for a long moment, the amber flecks in her eyes catching the last of the light. "You are a strange creature, Cyrus Talbot. I think I would like to know you better." "That's more forward than most people manage with me in a season," he said, and for the first time that day he smiled. "I am not most people," Grama said, and there was no arguing with that. The weeks that followed carried the particular restless energy of a border market settling into autumn trade, wagons rolling in from the iron-blood territories heavy with worked iron and pelts, human traders bartering grain and salt, and forged blades in the crooked lanes between stalls. Cyrus found reasons, more often than strictly necessary, to be present when the iron-blood trading party came through. A hinge that needed mending on their wagon, a horseshoe that had come loose, an excuse to walk the market lanes at the hour Grama usually inspected the iron stock for her clan. She, in turn, found reasons of her own. She lingered at Master Reeves' forge longer than any trade required, watching Cyrus work the bellows with an attention that made the back of his neck heat in a way that had nothing to do with the coals. She brought him strips of dried meat from her people's stores, calling it payment for the linen, though both of them understood by the third time that it was something else entirely. "You could simply say you enjoy my company," Cyrus told her one gray afternoon, testing the edge of a blade against his thumb while she leaned against the forge's doorframe, arms crossed, watching him with a look that had grown less guarded with every visit. "I could," Grama agreed. "I have not decided yet whether I want to give you the satisfaction." "That's fair. I haven't decided whether I want to survive it." She laughed at that, a real laugh, low and surprised out of her, and Master Reeve glanced over from the anvil with an expression that said he had opinions about a human forge hand and an orc warrior trading jests in his shop, but wisely kept them to himself. Not everyone in Fallowmere Crossing was so restrained. Cyrus heard the whispers in the tavern at night, saw the way certain townsfolk drew their children closer when Grama walked the lanes, heard Captain Vance's name spoken more than once in connection with a petition to restrict orc trading hours. The old war between their peoples had ended in treaty 2 decades past, but treaties did not unmake decades of buried grief and fear, and Cyrus knew better than most how thin the ice of tolerance could run. It was on a cold morning near the first frost that the tension nearly broke into open violence. A cart of iron-blood iron ingots bound for the smithy was ambushed on the road just outside town, not by bandits, as the story later got told in the taverns, but by 3 of Vance's own garrison men in plain cloaks, who meant to scatter the cargo and blame it on wolves or raiders. Another small cruelty meant to sour the season's trade. Cyrus, riding out to meet the delivery on Master Reeves' orders, arrived in time to see the ambush unfold and threw himself between the lead attacker's drawn blade and the frightened cart driver, taking a shallow cut across the forearm for his trouble before Grama, who had ridden out that morning to oversee the shipment herself. Some instinct pulling her along the road at just the right hour arrived like a thunderclap, scattering the attackers with nothing more than her bare hands and a voice that carried like a war horn. She had bound his arm herself that evening, her hands steadier and gentler than her reputation would suggest, her face inches from his in the lamplight of the forge's back room. "You keep putting yourself between danger and other people," she murmured, winding linen with careful precision. "One day there will be no orc riding by to save you." "One day," he agreed, watching her face rather than her hands. I imagine you'll be too busy needing saving yourself, and I'll return the favor. I do not need saving, Cyrus Talbot. Everyone needs it eventually, Grama Ironblood, even you. She had gone very still at that, her thumb resting a moment too long against the pulse in his wrist, and the air between them had gone taut as a bowstring, and neither of them moved to close the last handspin of distance, though both of them wanted to, and both of them knew the other wanted to, and it was that knowing, unspoken, smoldering, deliberately unresolved, that Cyrus carried with him through the following weeks like a coal banked under ash, waiting for wind. The message came at the tail end of autumn, carried by a runner from the garrison with orders sealed in the magistrate's own wax. A shipment of medicine, willowbark, and fever tonics, badly needed after a sickness had swept the Ironblood camp's children, was to be delivered under neutral escort to the clan's winter outpost in the high passes, and Master Reeve, whose forge held a long-standing trade agreement with the clan, was asked to send a man they trusted. You're the only one of my hands the Ironbloods will let within a mile of their camp without an escort of spears, Reeve told Cyrus, not unkindly. Take the mule train up the pass road, deliver the medicine to whoever's holding the outpost, and be back before the first real snow. Should be 4 days out, 4 back if the weather holds. The weather did not hold. Cyrus made the outpost delivery without trouble on the second day, finding it manned by a handful of Ironblood elders and children too young for the war camps, grateful and wary in equal measure of the human who had ridden 2 days through rising cold to bring them medicine. He turned his mule train back toward Fallowmere, crossing the following morning under a sky the color of a bruise, and by mid-afternoon the sky made good on its threat. The blizzard came down off the high passes with a speed that no amount of frontier experience could have prepared him for, a wall of white and shrieking wind that swallowed the trail markers, swallowed the sky, swallowed sound itself, until Cyrus could hear nothing but his own ragged breath and the terrified whinny of his mule before the animal bolted, leaving him alone and on foot in a world gone entirely white. He staggered forward more by instinct than sight, the cold already working its way past his cloak and into his bones, until his boot caught on a stone outcrop and he half fell, half crawled into the black mouth of a cave carved into the mountainside and found himself, snowblind and gasping, staring into the amber-flecked eyes of Grama Ironblood, who had a hand-axe half raised and murder in her expression before she recognized him. Cyrus! The axe lowered. Astonishment chased the fury from her face. What in the name of every buried ancestor are you doing out in this? Delivering medicine, he managed through chattering teeth. Outpost was heading back. Storm came out of nowhere. It has been building for 2 days. Any fool with eyes could have read the sky. But she was already moving, hauling him further into the cave's shelter, stripping the frozen cloak from his shoulders with hands that were rough with efficiency, and underneath that something gentler. You are a great fool, Cyrus Talbot, and it seems the gods have decided your foolishness is my burden to bear. The wind outside rose to a scream that made the very stone seem to shudder, and Grama dragged him deeper into the cave, past a store of dried meat and furs that told him this was no accidental shelter, but a watch post she had claimed for the season, some solitary vigil she kept over the high pass on her clan's behalf. She built up the small fire already smoldering in a ring of stones near the cave's mouth, angled to draw smoke out through a natural chimney crack in the rock, and pressed him down onto a pile of furs close to the flame. "Boots off," she ordered. "Now, before your feet forget how to feel anything at all." He was too cold and too grateful to argue. She worked his frozen boots free herself when his fingers proved too numb and clumsy for the laces, and then, with a matter-of-fact briskness that somehow made it less mortifying than it should have been, she took his bare feet between her broad, warm hands and rubbed the blood back into them until he gasped from the pain of feeling returning. "You would have lost toes tonight," she said. "Maybe more. You humans are so fragile in the cold." "I've noticed," he said through gritted teeth, and she almost smiled. Outside, the storm did not relent. It howled through the first night with a fury that made sleep impossible, snow piling against the cave mouth, until Grama had to wedge a slab of deadwood and packed snow into the gap to keep the worst of the wind from driving the fire out entirely. By the gray hour that might have been dawn, the world beyond the cave was an unbroken wall of white, and it was clear to both of them that there would be no leaving, not that day, and likely not the next. How long can a storm like this last? Cyrus asked, huddled in a fur that smelled of wood smoke and something warm and green that he was beginning to associate entirely with her. 3 days, sometimes 4, in the high passes this time of year. Grama settled across the fire from him, feeding it another careful stick of wood. You are trapped here with me, Cyrus Talbot, whether either of us likes it. I like it fine, he said, before he could think better of it, and then flushed at his own boldness. Grama's eyes found his across the flame, steady and unblinking. Do you? I've spent 3 years in that market town being careful, he admitted, the words coming loose the way they sometimes did in the strange intimacy of firelight and shared danger. Careful about who I speak to, careful about what I say, careful about being seen too clearly in case someone recognized what I used to be. I don't feel careful around you. I don't know what that means, but I know I don't hate it. What did you used to be? She asked, quiet now, no mockery in it. He was silent a long moment, watching the fire eat at the wood, and then he told her, the first time he had told anyone in 3 years. He told her about Aldermere, about the knighthood his family had bled for 3 generations to earn, about the border skirmish against a raiding party of her own people's distant cousins, about the order his commander Sir Reynard Voss had given after the fighting ended, to put the surrendered wounded to the sword, to leave no orc alive to carry word back of the garrison's position, and about the moment Cyrus Talbot, Sir Cyrus of Aldermere, had lowered his blade instead and stood between his own men and 6 terrified, disarmed orc prisoners, and told his commander that he would not do it. They stripped my knighthood in a season, he said, branded me a coward and a traitor to the crown. My own men wouldn't meet my eyes at the hearing. I took the family name that no one back east would recognize, and I came out to the border where nobody asks too many questions of a smith's hand, and I told myself I'd made my peace with it. Grama had gone very still throughout the telling, her jaw tight, something fierce and bright kindling behind her eyes. You spared orc lives, she said slowly, and your own people called you a traitor for it. They did. Then your own people are fools, and I am glad of it because it means you are here, in my mountain, telling me this, instead of wearing some lord's colors and hating my kind on principle. She reached across the fire and with a gentleness that seemed almost foreign to hands so capable of violence, closed her fingers around his. You are the only human I have ever met who chose mercy when it cost him everything. I do not think that is cowardice, Cyrus Talbot. I think it is the bravest thing I have ever heard of a man doing. His breath caught. The fire popped and hissed between them, and the storm screamed on outside. And inside the small, warm circle of that cave, something that had been building for weeks, through market lanes and forge smoke and stolen glances, and a broken chain in a trial circle, finally found nowhere left to hide. Grama, he said, her name rough in his mouth. I know, she said, and closed the last distance herself, her hand rising to cradle his jaw with a tenderness that made his chest ache, and kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss, not at first. There was too much banked hunger in both of them for gentleness. But it gentled as it went on, her mouth soft against his despite the sharp press of a tusk at the corner of his lip, his hands finding the leather laces at her side and stopping there, uncertain, and her low laugh against his mouth at his hesitation. You are allowed to touch me, Cyrus, she murmured. I have wanted your hands on me since you threw those tongs into my trial circle. I didn't want to presume. Then stop presuming and start doing. He laughed, breathless and a little dizzy, and kissed her again, and the fire burned low and warm beside them while the blizzard raged on outside, indifferent to the 2 hearts finally admitting what 3 weeks of stolen glances had already decided. The second day of the storm passed in a strange, suspended peace. They ate sparingly from her stores, told each other smaller truths between the larger ones already spoken. She told him of her own family, of a father who was chieftain of the Ironblood clan and had raised her to fight and to lead, of a mother lost to a border raid when Grama was young enough that the memory was more feeling than image, of the loneliness of being a warrior too strong and too proud for most orc men to court, and too orc in the eyes of the world. For the one human man who had ever made her chest ache the way Cyrus did now. "I have been offered marriage by 3 different clan sons," she told him, tracing idle patterns in the dust with a fingertip while he watched her face in the firelight. "Strong warriors, good iron workers. My father would be pleased if I chose any of them. Why haven't you?" "Because none of them made me feel the way I feel watching a soot-covered human smith throw tongs across a market square to save a woman he had never met." She looked up at him, unguarded in a way he suspected very few people had ever seen. "I do not know what this is, Cyrus Talbot. I have never wanted a human man before. I did not think it was possible to want one this much." "I've never wanted anyone the way I want you," he admitted. "I thought that part of me died in a hearing room 3 years ago along with everything else. You're proving me wrong about that, along with a great many other things." On the 3rd day, the storm's fury dropped, not gone, but breathing, the wind's scream falling to a low moan that let them hear faintly, a sound that made Grama's hand fly to her axe. The deep, hungry growl of a snow-wolf pack, driven down from higher ground by the blizzard and drawn by the scent of the mules' abandoned tracks, now nosing along the rocks outside the cave mouth. "Stay back from the entrance," Grama said, already on her feet, axe in hand, every trace of softness gone from her posture in an instant, replaced by the coiled readiness of a warrior. "Let me help. You have no weapon and no strength against a wolf's jaws in this cold. Stay back, Cyrus, I mean it." He did not stay back. When the first wolf's shadow darkened the packed snow barrier at the cave mouth, when its claws scrabbled at the deadwood slab wedging the entrance, Cyrus grabbed a burning branch from the fire and stood at Grama's shoulder instead of behind it, thrusting the flame toward the gap the moment the wolf's snout broke through. The animal yelped and recoiled, and Grama's axe came down in the same instant, driving the beast back into the storm with a force that sent the rest of the pack scattering, their growls fading into the wind. She stood at the cave mouth a long moment, chest heaving, axe still raised, before she turned and found Cyrus standing there with a burning branch in his shaking hand and a look on his face that was equal parts terror and fierce, stubborn determination. "You could have lost a hand to that jaw," she said. "You could have lost your back to that pack if I'd hidden behind the firs like you told me to. I told you to stay safe. And I told myself back in that market square that I'd never again stand by while someone I cared for faced danger alone. That promise didn't come with an exception for wolves, Grama." She stared at him, axe still in hand, snow melting in her dark hair and something in her face cracked open entirely, all the careful pride, all the warrior's composure giving way to something raw and undefended. "Cared for," she repeated softly. "More than cared for," Cyrus said. "I love you. I don't know when it happened. Somewhere between the trial and the forge in this cave, but it happened and I'm not sorry for it, storm or no storm." Grama set the axe down. She crossed the small space between them and framed his face in both broad hands, and this time when she kissed him there was nothing uncertain in it at all, only a fierce, claiming warmth that spoke of a decision already made and never to be unmade again. "Then hear me say it back," she murmured against his mouth. "I love you, Cyrus Talbot. Whatever comes of it, whatever the world outside this mountain decides to make of us, I choose you. I have chosen you since the day you threw tongs at my feet, and 3 days trapped in a cave with a blizzard for a witness has only made certain of what I already knew." They spent what remained of that 3rd night close together beneath the firs, the fire banked low, the wind outside finally beginning to gentle toward silence, and what passed between them in the warm dark was not spoken of afterward in detail, only held between them as a private, sacred thing. A joining of two people who had each spent years believing themselves unchosen, discovering all at once how it felt to be wanted, entirely and without reservation, by the one person whose wanting mattered most. By the fourth morning the storm had blown itself out entirely, leaving the mountain world scoured white and silent and impossibly bright under a clean blue sky. They dug the cave entrance clear together, and Grama found her horse sheltering in a rock defile not far off, half buried but alive, and Cyrus's mule, by some frontier miracle, had wandered back to the outpost on its own the day before. They rode down out of the high passes together in the cold, brilliant light, her hand finding his more than once across the space between their mounts, neither of them quite ready yet to imagine what waited for them in Fallowmere Crossing, and neither of them willing to let that uncertainty spoil the fierce, quiet joy of having survived the storm together and having found each other inside it. The market town had not been idle in Cyrus's absence. Word of a smith's hand and an orc warrior riding into the hills together, and not returning for 4 days, had reached Fallowmere Crossing well ahead of them, carried by a garrison patrol that had passed the outpost and put 2 and 2 together with the particular relish of men who enjoyed other people's scandal. By the time Cyrus and Grama rode back into the square, weary and wind-burned and still riding close together, the whispers had already curdled into something uglier, and Captain Aldrich Vance was waiting for them at the market gate with an expression of triumph he did not bother to hide. "There they are," he called out, loud enough to draw every eye in the square. "The forge hand and his orc, 4 days in the mountains alone together. I wonder what tales we'll hear of that." "Watch your tone, Captain," Cyrus said, dismounting, every muscle in his body suddenly tight with a wariness that had nothing to do with the cold. "Or what? You'll throw tongs at me too." Vance's smile was thin and cold. "It so happens I've had a visitor while you were away, Talbot, a man who was very interested to hear a smith's hand in my market answers to that particular name." He stepped aside, and from the shadow of the garrison house emerged a tall man in traveling colors that Cyrus recognized with a lurch of his stomach, even before the man's face came fully into the light silver at the temples now, harder lines around the mouth, but unmistakably Sir Reynard Voss, the commander who had stripped him of his knighthood 3 years before. "Cyrus," Voss said, and there was no warmth at all in the way he said it, "I confess I did not expect to find you playing at blacksmithing on the border, of all the places you might have run. Nor did I expect to find you keeping company with the very kind of creature you once defied a lawful order to protect." His gaze flicked to Grama, cold and assessing. "How fitting." "Say what you came to say, Voss," Cyrus said. "I came on the Crown's business, unrelated to you, as it happens, a survey of the border garrisons. But finding you here is a fortunate accident, because desertion of the Crown's service carries its own penalty, quite separate from the disgrace already on your name, and I find myself very interested in seeing that penalty enforced." Voss's smile was thin. "Captain Vance has already agreed to hold you for transport back to Aldermere for formal charges. Unless, of course, this market has some local custom for settling such things more quickly." Vance stepped forward smoothly as though the 2 men had rehearsed this. "As it happens, we do. Trial by combat is the treaty custom for disputed claims at this border, and I am prepared to call this a disputed claim, the Crown's claim on a deserter against whatever claim keeps him here." His eyes slid to Grama. "If the orc wishes to fight for him as she fought for herself not long ago, the town will allow it. Champion against champion. If our man wins, Talbot goes to Aldermere in chains, and the orc trading rights at this market are revoked for good measure, since it seems her kind cannot keep from meddling in Crown business. If her champion wins somehow, Talbot goes free and the treaty stands as it always has." "You'd stack a trial against her again," Cyrus said, fury rising hot in his chest. "Chain her wrists again, cheat the fight again. No chains this time." Vance's smile widened, unpleasant and sure of itself. "I don't need chains. I have something better." He gestured, and one of his men led forward not Grendel Ash, but a broader, scarred figure. Cyrus did not recognize a mercenary with cold, professional eyes and a long blade at his hip. That Cyrus, with a knight's trained instinct even after 3 years away from the sword, recognized instantly by the faint discoloration along its edge. "That blade's poisoned," he said quietly for Grama's ears alone. "I know," she murmured back, eyes never leaving the mercenary. "I can smell it from here. Wolfsbane and something bitter beneath it. Vance means for me to die in that circle, treaty or no treaty." "Then you won't fight." "I will fight," Grama said, low and fierce, "because if I do not, they take you to Aldermere in chains for a mercy you showed years ago, and I would rather die honestly in a market square than live watching that happen." She turned to him, and her hand found his jaw, and for a moment the crowd and the captain and the poisoned blade all fell away. "I told you in the cave I choose you, Cyrus Talbot. I meant it." "I still mean it." "Then let me stand with you," Cyrus said. "Not for you, with you. You have no weapon, no armor, and a knight's disgrace hanging over your head. You would only give Vance a second victim." "I have a smith's hammer and 3 years of pretending I forgot how to fight," Cyrus said. "Let me at least try, Grama. I won't stand behind a rope line and watch again." She studied him a long moment, and something in her face, fierce, proud, aching, softened into acceptance. "Then we fight together," she said, "as we should have from the first day in that circle." Magistrate Hale, uneasy but unwilling to defy a garrison captain and a crown officer both, called the trial to order. The crowd packed in tight around the dirt circle once more, drawn by the scent of spectacle, and Cyrus caught sight of Master Reeve near the front, his face troubled, and further back the faces of the Ironblood trading party who had come to market that morning and now stood tense and watchful, hands near hidden blades, ready to act if the trial turned into something worse than a duel. The mercenary came in fast, testing Grama's reach with the poisoned blade, and she gave ground carefully, drawing him wide of Cyrus, who circled with a borrowed smith's hammer held in a stance that 3 years of soot and quiet had not entirely erased from his muscle memory. When the mercenary lunged for Grama's exposed side, Cyrus's hammer came down across the blade's flat, deflecting the poisoned edge a bare handspan from her ribs, and the crowd gasped as one. "Knight's footwork," Voss said from the platform, watching Cyrus move with something like grudging, bitter recognition. "He hasn't forgotten as much as I'd hoped." Grama used the opening to drive her forearm into the mercenary's chest, sending him stumbling, and pressed the advantage with a speed that belied her size, forcing him back toward the rope line. But the man was skilled, trained in dirty tricks Grendel Ash had never needed, and he twisted at the last moment, driving the poisoned blade in a low arc that caught Cyrus across the ribs before Grama's fist caught the mercenary square in the jaw and dropped him senseless to the dirt. The crowd's noise became a roar, and then, seeing Cyrus stagger, a horrified murmur, and Grama was at his side before he hit the ground, catching him, her hands already tearing his shirt open to find the wound. "It's shallow," Cyrus gasped, though his vision was already swimming with a heat that had nothing to do with the cold autumn air. "Shallow cut, that's all." "Shallow or not, that blade was poison," Grama said, and her voice had gone sharp with a fear that cut through every ounce of her warrior's composure. She rounded on the platform, on Vance, on Voss, on the magistrate, with a fury that made even the garrison guard step back. "You would poison a duel meant to settle a lawful claim. This is not trial by combat. This is murder dressed in treaty clothes, and every soul in this square has just watched you commit it." "The man fought and lost," Vance said, though his voice had lost some of its confidence under the weight of the crowd's shifting attention. "What happens to the deserter after is his own misfortune." "There is an antidote to wolfsbane poison," Grama said, already tearing a strip from her own sleeve to bind the wound tight, buying time. "And it grows in the willow stands along this very river, which every trader at this market knows, Captain Vance, which means you knew exactly how shallow a cut it would take to kill a man slowly enough to look like an accident of the duel, and not the crime it truly is. The crowd's murmur had turned, in the space of a few sentences, from spectacle hunger to something closer to outrage. Master Reeve pushed forward through the rope line, ignoring the guard's half-hearted attempt to stop him. "I've traded with this market 20 years, he said, loud enough to carry. "I never thought I'd see a garrison captain poison a blade in a lawful trial. Someone fetch the willow bark for the love of every god watching. Now." It was Grama who moved fastest. She scooped Cyrus up bodily, ignoring his weak protest that he could walk, and carried him through the parting crowd toward the trading stalls where willow bark and river reeds were sold for tea and healing both, her face a mask of grim determination that dared anyone to stand in her way. No one did. Not the garrison guards, who looked to Vance for orders that did not come quickly enough. Not the townsfolk, who watched an orc warrior carry a wounded human man through their market square with an expression that had shifted, in the span of one poisoned blade, from suspicion to something closer to awe. The willowbark tea, brewed strong and bitter and forced down Cyrus's throat, while Grama held him upright against her chest in the shade of the trading post awning, worked exactly as the old frontier remedies claimed it would, drawing the worst of the poison's fever out over the following hour while half the market stood vigil at a respectful distance. And Magistrate Hale, perhaps sensing which way the wind of public opinion had finally, decisively turned, quietly ordered the mercenary and Captain Vance, both held under guard, pending a full accounting of the poisoned blade. By the time the fever broke and Cyrus's eyes opened clear again, blinking up at Grama's face hovering fierce and worried above his own, the market square outside the awning had gone strangely, thoroughly silent, and it was Sir Reynard Voss's voice that broke that silence, stepping forward to address the crowd with the particular discomfort of a man watching his carefully constructed argument collapse in real time. "The Crown's business here concerned desertion," Voss said stiffly, "not attempted murder by poison. I will not have my survey associated with Vance's methods. The charge of desertion stands on its own merits, and I still intend to see Talbot answer for it." "Then answer it here," Grama said, rising from beside Cyrus with a stillness that carried more menace than any shout could have. "You say he deserted the Crown's service. He says he refused an order to murder disarmed prisoners. Let the market judge which of those is the greater crime, since it seems this square has become so fond of trials." She turned to face the crowd fully now, the same crowd that had jeered her chains weeks before, and her voice rang out clear and unafraid. "This man spared 6 orc lives at the cost of his own name, his own home, his own place among his people. I have spent 3 years alone at a border he chose to live near, doing penance for a mercy that should have earned him honor instead of disgrace. I do not know your crown's laws, Sir Voss, but I know what kind of man refuses to murder the helpless even when his commander orders it, and I know that man is worth more than any knighthood your crown ever gave him or took away." The crowd was silent, and then from somewhere near the back, Master Reeve's voice rose up, gruff and sure. "She's right. I've employed the man 3 years, never known him to raise a hand except to defend someone weaker than himself. If that's desertion, it's the kind this border could use more of." Other voices rose to join his traders who had watched Cyrus quietly mend wagon wheels for widows who couldn't pay. A tavern keeper whose daughter Cyrus had once pulled from a runaway cart. The Ironblood traders themselves, who spoke in their own tongue among themselves before their eldest called out that the clan would not soon forget a human who had bled defending one of their own in an honest fight after having already bled once for orc lives years before. Voss looked out at a crowd that had, in the space of an afternoon, decided rather firmly which side of this argument it stood on, and something in his hard face finally cracked into weary defeat. "I did not come here to start a riot over a border smith," he said. "The Crown has larger concerns than one disgraced knight's private conscience. Let the record show Cyrus Talbot resigned his commission honorably those years past, and let this matter be closed." It was not quite truth, and everyone present knew it, but it was enough to close a wound that had followed Cyrus for 3 years, offered not out of kindness, but out of a commander's grudging recognition that some battles were not worth the fighting. Vance, stripped of his mercenaries' victory and exposed before the very townsfolk he had hoped to rally, was led away under guard by his own garrison men. His authority in Fallowmere Crossing effectively ended before the magistrate's formal inquiry into the poisoned blade had even begun. Cyrus, still weak from the fading poison but steady enough now to stand with Grama's arm braced under his own, looked out at the crowd that had gathered the same market square, where he had once thrown tongs across a trial circle, the same dirt where Grama had broken an iron chain with her bare hands, the same place where 3 years of careful hiding had just unraveled into something far better than the disgrace he'd feared. "I believe," Grama said quietly for his ears alone, "that this market owes us both an apology and a very great deal of quiet from now on." "I think," Cyrus said, "they might actually give it to us." She looked down at him, amber-flecked eyes bright with something fierce and tender both, and then in front of the magistrate, in front of Master Reeve, in front of the garrison guards leading Vance away in chains, in front of every townsfolk who had once jeered her chains and whispered about her presence in the market lanes, Grama Ironblood tipped Cyrus Talbot's chin up with one broad hand and kissed him slow and certain and utterly unhurried, acclaiming as much as a comfort. Daring anyone present to object, no one did. A few of the traders even cheered, and Master Reeve, gruff as ever, muttered something about young people having no sense of propriety before turning away to hide the smile he could not quite suppress. The winter that followed was, by the standards of a border market town, a quiet one. Vance's schemes were unwound thread by thread in the weeks after the trial. The horse theft revealed as his own men's doing, the poisoned blade traced to garrison coin, his commission stripped by a crown inspector sent in Voss's wake, who had considerably less patience for local corruption than Voss himself had shown. The magistrate, chastened, quietly amended the market's trial customs so that no accused party, human or orc, would ever again face a circle stacked so plainly against them. Cyrus kept his place at Master Reeve's forge, though he no longer bothered pretending his knight's training had left him entirely, teaching a handful of the market's younger hands the footwork that had saved his life in that final duel. Grama's trading visits, once brief and businesslike, stretched into long, unhurried seasons at the market's edge, until it became simply understood, without any formal announcement needed, that where Cyrus Talbot's forge stood, Grama Ironblood's tent would be pitched nearby, and where Grama's people traded, Cyrus would be found at her shoulder, welcome now among the Ironblood traders in a way that would have seemed unthinkable a season before. Her father, the Ironblood chieftain, sent no formal blessing and asked for none. Only a single message carried down from the high camps with the season's first thaw, delivered by a young clan runner who grinned as he handed it over. That Thaka Ironblood had heard the tale of the poisoned duel and the broken chain both, and that any man his daughter chose to stand beside through iron and fire, and blizzard alike, was welcome at Ironblood fires whenever he cared to come. On the evening the first true snow of the new winter began to fall soft and quiet over Fallowmere Crossing, Cyrus found Grama at the edge of the market square, watching the flakes settle over the very ground where a trial circle had once been trampled into the dirt, now soft and white and unmarked by any of it. "Thinking of the cave?" he asked, coming to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Always a little when the first snow falls," she admitted. 3 days trapped with a half-frozen human who threw tongs at trial circles and hammers at poisoned mercenaries. I do not think I have ever been more frightened or more certain of anything than I was in that cave. "Certain of what?" "That I did not want to leave it," she said, turning to face him fully, snow catching in the dark strands of her hair. "Not the cave, you. I never asked you to leave, Cyrus, not for one moment of those 3 days, and I find I still have no wish to ask it now." Good, Cyrus said, drawing her down into a kiss as unhurried and certain as the falling snow around them, right there in the open square where anyone might see, where no one any longer thought to object. Because I've got nowhere else I'd rather be, and no one else I'd rather be there with. The snow kept falling, soft and steady, over the market town that had once tried so hard to keep them apart, and neither Grama Ironblood nor Cyrus Talbot paid the cold any mind at all.